Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I'm fixing dinner. This is going to be a late night dinner. Um, and while I'm waiting for that to work, I decided to do another show. So this one may not necessarily go as long as the other ones, and I'm seeing myself moving and shaking, so I'm going to take it that I'm up. Yeah, this one may not go as long as the other ones. But I like doing this because I like focusing on British media also. And this particular Prime Minister questions, I watch it every Wednesday. This particular one, I love it. I love it. So you can do research when you're listening to Prime Minister questions, but I gotta be honest, if you listen closely to what's being said, it gets across what the person is meaning. Meaning, yes, you can impeach their testimony by pulling up information about the person. But in this very specific case with Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, what Theresa May says, if you listen to what she says, what you actually listen to what she says, it gets across everything it gets across what you need to hear. Meaning the evidence and the truth is in what she says. She just cuts her language in a very particular way. Conservatives do this all the time. Conservatives in the United States, same thing. It depends on who you're talking to. It's your base. It's your audience. When they're talking about we're going to make more freedom, well, they're not talking to you. They're talking to their audience, to people who are putting dollars in their G-strings and is sending them out there to parrot a particular opinion to the public. You guys are trying to become Little America. Don't become Little America on this front. Don't become that particular way. If you listen to her language, it tells you what you need to hear. Prime Minister questions. Let's let them do their thing. Jeremy Corbyn.
Across the country.
Whoa.
And I paid.
The plan was.
David K. Johnston is a pure.
Damn it. Hold on, guys. Fuck it
That
up.
women could get the right to vote. I was
And that our right.
secretary.
On the basis that the Manston site was to be redesignated.
My honourable friend is right to raise this matter on behalf of his constituents. Has not been doing
Accept our.
plan. So my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is now considering whether to intervene, and he will be making an announcement in due course.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Captain Dean Sprouting from Jarrow on his death, and his family must accept our condolences on this terrible incident that happened. It is, of course, the anniversary of women first getting the right to vote in 1918, and I pay tribute to all those that campaigned all over the country to achieve that right. And we should understand that our rights come from the activities of ordinary people doing extraordinary things to bring about democracy and justice within our society. And those women that suffered grievously, being force-fed in Holloway Prison in my constituency, and those that suffered so much, need to be remembered for all time. Working-class women, as well as many other women, fought for that right, and it's one that we should all be proud of. Mr. Speaker, with crime rising, does the Prime Minister regret cutting 21,000 police officers?
Can I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman that we should be saluting all of those who were involved in that struggle to ensure that women could get the right to vote. I was very pleased yesterday to have an opportunity to meet Helen Pankhurst, the great-granddaughter of Emmeline Pankhurst, and to see that that memory is being kept going. And as I said yesterday...
Just to be clear about this, the goal of Prime Minister questions is to allow the opposition and other people in the Parliament to ask the Prime Minister a question. Jeremy Corbyn started off giving credit to, this great thing that women were allowed to vote in 1918 and some of the struggles that they went through. Now, Theresa May has already given a long, start on this, meaning going into the women's thing. And yes, it's a good thing. Nobody's pushing back on it. And it's as if she's completely dodging a question using an answer that was never brought up. Meaning, Jeremy Corbyn comes and says, look, we want to give her, acknowledgement of women's suffrage, et cetera, and he asks this question. She had already given this particular speech, not this very specific speech, but she had already talked about the women's suffrage thing. And yet, in order to dodge a question about conservative government, once again, cutting budgets, cutting social services, and firing cops. Her start off is about something that is entirely unrelated and that she's already hit upon once. Part of this that they like to bring up is the Labour government hasn't had a female prime minister. And we, the Tory government, have had female prime ministers. So we are more fucking awesome on this particular topic. We're more awesome on this topic. The question, miss, the question was, are you laying off all those cops, 20,000 cops, with this rise of crime? Do you think that was a bad decision? Let her keep going. By the way, when I was in Egypt, I was in Cairo. This was 2008-ish, I think. I was walking down the street. I think it was really late at night because I got there like 3 in the morning and I was starving. And I ended up going to, I couldn't speak the language. And I didn't understand the currency. The money was different. Like it was fundamentally different than American's currency. Or I wasn't familiar with the currency. And so I'm walking around like pointing to food, trying to get people to give me food. They're like, yes, that. This, all right, here. Fuck it. I don't know how much that is, but let's keep going. So I sleep most of that day. And that particular night I'm walking out. And there's a guy who walks up on me and he's like, hey. He's like, what's that? What's that tattoo? I have tattoos. I have tattoos all over. He says, what's that tattoo? And him and I are talking. And we end up going to one of, it's like a little hookah bar. Where they have drinks, coffee, food, and little snacks and everything else. And you can just smoke the hookah pipe. And him and I sat there talking for maybe an hour or so, getting wasted on hookah. Like, this stuff is immensely strong, ridiculously strong. And at a certain point, I'm like, all right, I'm traveling alone. I've had enough. I don't need any more of this. But as him and I talking, he says, women have started getting rights in this country. And he says everything was good until women started getting more rights in the country itself. Now, he's joking when he's saying this, so don't misunderstand me. Americans have this impression that women like walk 5 steps behind their people, and it's nothing to be further from the truth. Women are women, even in Egypt. And you would have women having to go with their men, just like you have women having to go with their men here in the United States. He was entirely joking. He ends up going to Britain and being a love toy for this British woman. It's fucking hilarious. Hearing this guy talk about this was amazing. But no, he was talking about like women's rights in Egypt and how those rights have started to improve and all this other stuff and the consequences of those rights improving. Meaning women are like, yeah, we're not happy with the shit that goes on, and we're not taking any shit off you guys. I just thought it was interesting and funny. Just to go back to this for a moment. Jeremy Corbyn asked her about firing cops. Just understand that was the question. Do you regret the decision to fire all those cops with this increase in crimes? Let's keep going. Do her diatribe.
In my speech, I myself heard about the fight by the suffragettes from my late godmother, whose mother was a suffragette and whose parents knew the Pankhursts. He raises the issue of police numbers and crime. What we actually have seen from the crime survey is that crime is now down at record low levels. That is what has been achieved, and it's been achieved by a Conservative government that at the same time has been protecting police budgets.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker.
Whoa. Yeah, talk about that one. What does that mean? Protecting police budgets. What does that mean? That's just an interesting thing to say. You're protecting the police budgets. Why do you have to protect the police budgets? He's asked you, why did you fire those cops? Why did you fire those cops? And with this increase in crime, do you regret that choice? Protecting the police budgets assume that the police budgets are under pressure and under the potential of being cut. It's as if you're saying you're stopping. You, the Conservative government, have sway over whether or not you're going to increase the budget or decrease the budget. Who are you protecting it from? Who are you protecting that from? That's such a weird phrasing of words to try to make cuts sound like some bonus or some kind of plus. That's fucking weird. Just really bizarre phrasing. We're protecting the budgets. From who? You're the Conservative government. It's your choice. Who are you protecting them from? Yourselves? It's like a person who's overweight saying, look, I can't trust myself, so I need you to hold on to this, the refrigerator key or something. You're protecting them from yourselves. You're not protecting them at all. You're not protecting them at all. Let's keep going. It's fucking weird phrase.
Recorded crime is up by 1/5 since 2010. Violent crime up by 20%. And during the period the Prime Minister was Home Secretary, 2.3 billion was cut from police budgets. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary warns neighbourhood policing risks being eroded and the shortage of detectives is at a national crisis. Does the Prime Minister think the Inspectorate are scaremongering?
The Right Honourable Gentleman mentions the issue about recorded crime. One of the challenges that we have seen in police in recent years is ensuring that we get proper recording of particularly of certain types of crime. And I'm pleased to say that we have seen improvements over the last 7 to 8 years in the recording by police of certain types of crime. Now, he also talks about the issue of police budgets, as I've said. This is a government that is actually protecting police budgets. And I might remind the Right Honourable Gentleman that the Labour Party's former Shadow Home Secretary, now the Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester, himself said that the police could take an up to 10% cut in their budgets.
Again, she didn't really answer that question. I even wrote it down because, she tends to go fucking weeds. Do you believe that the guy who mentioned those cuts in the budget being harmful to Britain itself? This is somewhat of a dismantling. Crime has gone up in this capacity. And actually, I have the link up. But I'm just making this point that if you're saying I am protecting police budgets, who are you protecting that from? Who are you protecting that from? You're the Conservative government. You're Tories. You're in office. You have full control over the political apparatus. You can do whatever you want. Who's the goblin at the door that you believe has more power than you, that is going to somehow decapitate these police budgets? That you, Theresa May, has your broadsword and you're fighting back the beast. Who is this? Who is this? Who is this extrajudicial, extra constitutional factor in British politics that is attacking the budgets of police? That Theresa May and the Conservative government have bravely and strongly beat back the beast who's at the door trying to kill police budgets. I mean, come on. What does that mean? What does that mean? It's slippery language. Let me see. Here we go. Let's take a look at this. Simple numbers tell story of police cuts under Theresa May. Theresa May just said she increased it. I mean, she wouldn't lie, would she? I think she'd obfuscate. Police numbers, including the number of armed police, have fallen sharply under Theresa May's watch as first Home Secretary between 2010 and 2016, and then as Prime Minister. The simple numbers tell the story. In 2010, May, as Home Secretary, made the mistake that Margaret Thatcher never made in the 1980s and agreed to a Treasury demand to cut police budgets by 18%. That's what she's talking about. The Treasury is demanding that she cut police budgets, and her argument is, we're protecting the police budgets. We're protecting the police budgets. You have full control over the apparatus. You can do whatever you want. You're not protecting. You're not protecting. You can make that change. Over the next 5 years, the number of police officers in England and Wales fell from its peak of 144,353 in 2009 to 129,859 in 2016. At the same time, the number of specialist armed police officers have fallen from a peak of 6,796 in 2010 to 5,639 in 2016. As the graph shows, it would appear to be open and shut case that cuts in police officers have had an impact on the capacity of the police to respond. May was told in 2010 that in cutting officer funding, she was making a mistake that Thatcher never made when she instinctively realized that there would come a crucial moment when the country and her premiership would depend entirely on her resilience of the thin blue line. May took a different approach as Home Secretary that was not without foundation. She argued that with the big continuing falls in crime that had been seen since the 1990s, it was not necessary to maintain such a large police force. Anyway, it was argued there was no direct link between the number of officers and the level of crime. Why do we have any police officers? Why do we have any? Like, if you're making that argument, there is no connection at all between cops and robbers. Really? I understand as a conservative government, you want to pitch pennies. I understand as a conservative government that you are instinctively against this idea of having social services, meaning healthcare, education, those things being provided by the government to make sure that the citizenry is up to speed, has the healthcare that it needs, the citizenry can live its life without necessarily being dragged down by one business after the next that looks to hit you over the head and steal money from your pocket in each and everything that you need to do within your life. We all are vulnerable, so we have healthcare as a nation. We all want to expand beyond what we are, so we have education. As a nation, we provide those things. I understand that as a conservative government, you are instinctively against those things. But certainly there are limits. Like, in any capacity, anything that you do, and something that you believe that you're required, don't you have to actually pay for the thing that you require? I mean, it is a rough argument to make that there is no connection between cops and robbers. That's fucking amazing, that's all. You have a pressure cooker of a society just like other societies, where you're going to have poverty, you're going to have hunger and stress and all these other things. That pressure cooker is going to breed crime. I'm sorry, it does. The capitalist system breeds a certain amount of crime. Cops is the way that the capitalistic system comes up with using or solving crime. Now, it is I would argue, somewhat of a blunt force strategy that doesn't all work that well. But nevertheless, that's the system that you guys come up with. It makes perfect sense in the world that the less cops you have, the less their capacity would be to respond. That seems to be just a one-to-one thing. If I have 1,500 cops, I can't respond to things as well as if I had 30,000 cops. I think that's a fair point. Why doesn't Theresa May know that? There was no direct link between the number of officers and the level of crime. Well, Jeremy Corbyn is asking her, do you regret that statement? Do you regret doing that? It's funny, she says, we put in the capacity of recording the crime. As Home Secretary, I put in a process that allowed us to record crime better. I just didn't give the money to make sure that we had the officers actually do something about the crime that we were recording in a better way. Hey, good job on that recording the new crime. How about actually hiring some officers to do something about it? So let's keep going. And look, I am not on the cop bandwagon. Personally, you may need some level of force. But here's the catch. If you're not going to do anything about the drivers of crime, then it's the conservative government wants to cut everything. They want private enterprise for everything. They want less wages and everything else. They want things that put stress on the society and the economy and the people in that society. We want to make your lives harder. We're the conservative government. If you're the top 1%, fucking A. If you're not, bad for you. We're trying to make this into little America. You can understand that that's going to breed a certain amount of pressure to the people who are dealing with a government like that. That's going to breed a certain amount of problems in your society. And yeah, crime is going to be one of those X factors that come about from the society that this conservative government is trying to create. It seems weird to me that you're going to create these drivers of crime and at the same token not have anything to do anything about the crime that you yourself are creating in the way that the government that you're creating. I think the drivers for crime is not necessarily cops. I think the drivers for crime is poverty, difficulty, stress. People had an easier life. Would those people be more or less inclined to commit certain actions? Meaning, am I stealing something if I don't have the need to steal something? Am I hitting somebody over the head to take their wallet if I don't have a need to hit somebody over the head to take their wallet? I suspect that you're always going to have some level of crime. But do you really want a society that drives that level of crime? That's what I'm getting at. And I'm saying the conservative government is doing two things. Driving the level of crime in the policies that it's espousing. And cutting cops. Meaning there's no way to record the fact of that particular crime. Oh yes, recording. I forgot. She has an awesome recording thing. But there's no way to no capacity to do anything about the crime that's being committed. Let's keep going. I think that's pretty straightforward. At least I hope so.
Mr. Speaker, the Inspectorate also found that the police are failing to properly record tens of thousands of offences. And in addition to the cutting of 21,000 police officers, the government's also cut 6,700 police community support officers. The Chief Constable of Bedfordshire says we do not have the resources to keep residents safe. The position is a scandal. Too many people don't feel safe and too many people aren't safe. We've just seen the highest rise in recorded crime for a quarter of a century. The Chief Constable of Lancashire said the government's police cuts had made it much more difficult to keep people safe. Is he wrong?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, on this issue of recording crime, he mentions the Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. It's precisely because when I was Home Secretary, I asked HMIC to look at the recording of police crime to make sure that police forces were doing it properly. And indeed, some changes were made as a result of that. So we now see the better recording of crime. We also see £450 million extra being made available to the police. But what have we also seen over the last few years? The creation of the National Crime Agency, our police forces taking more notice of helping to support vulnerable victims, doing more on modern slavery, doing more on domestic violence, taking issues seriously that they weren't taking seriously before.
I gotta be honest, I hate it when she does that. It's somewhat disingenuous to say, look, yes, we've gotten rid of 28,000 police or whatever, but we've added X amount of dollars into this particular thing. Just because you add money to something doesn't necessarily mean that the amount of money you add was adequate to do what you needed that particular thing to do. Maybe they needed more than that particular number. Quoting the numbers is not the same thing as quoting, this is what this thing needs, as opposed to this is what we're giving it. Those are two separate and distinct things. And if these guys are willing to cut corners on something like, a police force, like 20,000 is a big sharp jump or sharp cut. And then you have a sharp rise in crime. Well, you know my theory on the crime thing. I think crime is driven based on economic concerns. But it's kind of besides the point. What you have here is we cut the number of cops, crime is rising. What is the conservative government doing? We put a bunch of money into XYZ. They're seeing more stabbings. He's talking about a higher increase in crime in like 20 years. And you're telling me about these other departments that these guys have started looking into and recording. He's asking you something very basic. And what he's saying is not insane. It's not crazy. It's coming based on the public, based on the news itself. Stabbings are up this much. Crime is up this much. The conservative government cut cops by 21%, or 21,000 cops. You can understand that people have an issue with this. Your defense on it seems a bit shaky. Putting money in something is not the same thing as actually giving it what it needs to function. That's why I dislike this particular argument, because she brings it up all the time. We gave X amount of dollars, or X amount of pounds. I'll let her finish.
Speaker, if you ask the inspector to look at unrecorded crime and they tell you what's going on, the least you can do is act on what they tell you. Mr. Speaker, if I could quote something at the Prime Minister, it might sound familiar to her. The first duty of the government is to protect the public and keep them safe. And I have to say to the government that they are not putting enough focus on police resources. If she casts her eyes to the far back benches of the Conservative Party, she'll see the member for Shipley. That's what he said about her government and what it's doing. Gun crime, Mr. Speaker, has increased by 20% in the last year. The Chief Constable of Merseyside said recently, "Have I got sufficient resources to fight gun crime?" No, I haven't. Does the Prime Minister think he's crying wolf?
The right honourable gentleman can't get away from the fact that what the government is doing is protecting police budgets. In fact, not just protecting police budgets, but increasing with £450 million extra pounds. What we are also doing is ensuring that our police have the powers that they need to do the job that we want them to do. I seem to remember the right honourable gentleman doesn't have that good a record when it comes to increasing the powers for the police to do their job.
And he shouldn't. He shouldn't. The police responsibility, or the job of the police, should not necessarily have these unlimited powers to go into your affairs and go into your lives and all this other stuff. No, he shouldn't. He shouldn't. If he's a lefty, he's not going to feel that cops should get all of these powers and all of this authority without the oversight. In fact, they shouldn't have those powers at all. all governments want the capacity to take away rights of the citizenry. It's always the reason why we have the Fourth Amendment in the first place is because they were concerned about that very specific thing. The idea that we gave that up without a fight, we gave that up wholesale, is problematic, to say the least. Don't belittle America. Don't belittle America. Let's take a listen to Jeremy Corbyn's thing on this. The interesting part to this question is this is one of those things that's hurled at lefties all the time, and lefties fold when they hear stuff like this. You would have Democrats acting like Republicans in regards to this crime thing. So Bill Clinton will go out and pass a crime bill. It's like that a right-winger, for all intents and purposes, will pass. But that being said, he was able to join hands with Newt Gingrich on this. I mean, if you're going to deal with this question, I would say make the argument as to the lefty position, not necessarily just automatically ape the Republican position of more time, we need to get tougher on crime, we need to put people in prison longer. That is the dumbest response. Republican politicians are not all that bright in regards to the way they regard these things, and intellectually, definitely not from the standpoint of trying to figure out what are the drivers of an issue, why is this issue caused. Their solution, just put them in prison. Just put them in jail. That's all. Just put them in jail. We don't have to think about it too much. More cops, larger prisons, and let's get corporations down to put people in prison. And we can make a buck off those people, because if we're in California, people like Kamala Harris want to have people in prison longer because it hurts California's economy if those people got out of prison and they had to actually pay somebody. When they're in prison, you can pay them 33 cents an hour. We can make a buck off those people in slave labor. The Democratic office wanted to keep people in prison longer so those people can work for 33 cents an hour in various capacities, but also in forest fires. Man, come on. It's fucking insane. Let's hear his answer. He's not going to ape the Republican or conservative position. He's actually going to hold the shape. And I love this. This is why, and I got to be honest, this little part right here is the entirety of why I played this video. He held the shape. He held the shape. This is a remarkable thing. And I know some people are like, dude, that's a small... No, that's a more remarkable thing. If you're in the United States, seeing somebody hold their shape from a position on the left is a fucking remarkable thing. And this is why I like this guy so much. Let's take a look.
Mr. Speaker, since 2015, direct government funding to the police has fallen by $413 million. The Chief Constable of the West Midlands, Dave Thompson, said the current flat cash settlement for policing means force budgets will fall in real terms. As well as police cuts, other public service cuts are clearly contributing to the rise in crime. 3,600 youth workers have lost their jobs. 600 youth centres closed and boarded up. Probation service cut and privatised. Re-offenders committing more offences. When it comes to tackling crime, prevention and cure are two sides of the same coin. So why is the government cutting both prevention and cure?
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, we've put in place various pieces of work on anti-knife crime, on serious violence, on issues like domestic violence. But
Clearly it's not working. Clearly it's not working. I understand. I understand. You're putting money in stuff. Clearly it's not working. You're making massive cuts across the board, and in making these massive cuts across the board, they're having negative consequences with regards to your society. You can put all the money in. You can tell us how much money you're putting in. Clearly, what you and your government is doing is not working. I'm going to let her make her answer.
I come back to the point I made in the my last response. The Leader of the Opposition, the right honourable gentleman, voted against changing the law so that anyone caught carrying a knife for a second time would face a custodial sentence. He has called for much shorter sentences for those who break the law. And he might want to reflect on the fact that when there was a Conservative mayor in London, knife crime went down. Now there's a Labour mayor in London, knife crime is going up.
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, very clear that crime is, of course, wrong. The way you deal with it is by an effective probation service, is by community service orders, is by the rehabilitation of offenders. And what she said goes to the heart of the Prime Minister's record. She, Mr. Speaker, was Home Secretary for 6 years. Crime is up, violent crime rising, police numbers down, and chief constables saying they no longer have the resources to keep communities safe. After 7 years of cuts, will the Prime Minister today admit that her government's relentless cuts to police, probation services and social services have left us less safe? The reality is, you can't have public safety on the cheap.
Now, do you think Theresa May is going to come back and say, you know what? I thought about what you just said. You're right. All of these cuts for the last 7 years, one cut after the next. You're right. Crime has gone up. People are being stabbed more. Probations, people are, running afoul of their probations. You are absolutely right. The information she presented is absolutely true. The guy who was even in my own party is bitching about the crime thing. You're right. I can't challenge the evidence. Can't challenge information. It burns me to say it, Jeremy, but you're right. Do you believe that the honesty is going to come out of Theresa May after this particular performance, where she obfuscates, where she tells about how much money she's putting in stuff and completely misses the point? Your cuts is making things less safe. I would argue this is taking place in two fronts. The cuts from the standpoint of the typical citizen in Britain, meaning the normal social fabric of Britain itself, but also from the other side, meaning the police side. Now, Jeremy Corbyn held his shape and made this point that your answer to this stuff is this red meat, throw him in a cage. That's your answer. That's your answer. That's a slick answer that gets somewhat of a punchline for people who are rabid and want red meat. But what does it mean to actually deal with crime and the drivers of crime? Why is this crime taking place? Why is this person holding this knife? Why is this person running afoul of his probation? Why does this person need probation in the first place? Those are more difficult questions. Those are more difficult questions. But dealing with crime is dealing with those particular questions and dealing with those questions in an honest way. So I'm glad Jeremy Corbyn held in his shape. Let's hear Theresa May's answer to finish it off.
Well, the right honourable gentleman really needs to reflect on what Labour would be doing if they were in government. You can only pay for our public services if you have a strong economy. And what would we see? What would we see with the Labour Party? Well, we don't need to ask ourselves what we'd see with the Labour Party, because the Shadow Chancellor's advisor told us at the weekend. He said this: we need to think about the obvious problems which might face a radical Labour government, such as capital flight or a run on the pound. That's what Labour would do. Bankrupt Britain, and the police would have less money under Labour than under the Conservatives.
They would have less money. She uses that argument all the time. That's the only argument that they really ever use. That's the only argument you can't really use against Corbyn. I mean, if you have somebody who's into the business of what, or from the perspective of, I'm looking at this from the perspective of labor, meaning I'm looking at this from the perspective of the overwhelming majority of the people that are in this country. This is my perspective as the Labour government. If you're Theresa May, you're not looking at it from that perspective. You're looking at it as, how can I privatize? How can I chop away at elements of the government? How can I make this government smaller? How can I drown this government into a bathwater to get it to look more like America in regards to the rapacious nature of that country itself? How can we get rid of public services? How can we destroy what's known as Britain and normalize that behavior so Britain, for the most part, looks like little America and is okay with looking like little America? How? It keeps them up at night. That's what they think about. When they're cutting police services, that's what they're thinking about. That's the ultimate goal. When they're cutting the NHS, that's the ultimate goal. When they're not giving these social programs and these social services the things that they need to exist in a proper fashion, that is their ultimate goal. Do not try to look like little America. And I would say whatever you need to do, Britain, to hold the line in regards to keeping them from being as rapacious and batshit crazy as they are in the United States, do what you have to do. I will tell you this. The conservatives in your government are the Democrats in this government. I will tell you that. Now, they're spineless in our government. Your government is a little bit different because you have different pressures associated with the way they behave. But they will move further and further to the right if you allow them to move further and further to the right. And you will wake up one morning and you will look around and be like, holy shit, we've lost our healthcare system. We lost our education system. All of these other things have been privatized. They are raping our government blind in regards to the money that we're spending on private interests, giving private interests our government money, our tax money, for services that are not anywhere near as good as they were before, and ultimately benefiting only a small majority of people, small minority of people. That's my warning. That's from across the pond. That's my warning to Britain. So, let's see. Tomosi Young, Russia debate, Cal versus Jink, TYT policy. Oh, I am going to watch that. I'm going to watch that. I'm going to watch that tomorrow. That's going to be one of my shows tomorrow. I haven't watched it yet because I want to watch it fresh when I see it. But I've heard that Cal wiped the floor with him. I've heard Jink got his ass handed to him. So, Mikey Mike, the Russian buyer, Germany. Yeah, I had cataract surgery about a year ago. Despite insurance, it's going to cost me $15,000. That's fucking amazing. Jay Scott, I lasted 1 minute and had to get the fuck out. Total waste of time. Unrig is. Oh, you're talking about unrig something. Let's see. She folded that binder like a shrooming bison. Damn. Yeah, she. Yeah, like British politics is awesome in the way that they be like leaning over the podium and like pointing, and, all this other stuff. One of the things I love was Jeremy Corbyn, when it was like he was annoyed by a question. He's leaning over, giving his answer. The thing is, very rarely does opposition respond, or sometimes the opposition doesn't respond. So the fact that he responded to that meant that he wanted to nail that answer. He wanted to put that down of holding his shape, to get across this, how we view criminal justice versus how they view criminal justice, the caveman approach to criminal justice as opposed to an actual thoughtful approach to handling those things. Yeah, man, it was good. Shank is a partisan hack. His recent interview with the former governor of Alabama should seal the deal on that. Uh-oh. I have to watch that. I have to watch it. Interview governor of Alabama. Does Chink ever want to debate? Oh, that's funny, because you're talking about the conversation with the other guy. The guy who talks very fast, Ben Shapiro. I didn't think he lost that debate. Ben Shapiro just talked really fast. So you end up with this kind of style dynamic where one guy is talking fast and putting out a lot of bogus, ridiculous, libertarian nonsense. And the other guy is trying to put out some lefty stuff, but it's style. It's more of a tone thing. I didn't think he lost it, but lose it. But that's different. Robert Pouquet, I was just watching the debate. Cal ripped Chink to pieces, and Chink was weak, especially in hacky. Yeah, Finnith. So, yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, because ultimately, at the end of the day, everything's said and done, regardless of what you're talking about in that debate, what you're talking about, that conversation, boils down to really one question. Can you look me in the eye and definitively, as a flat fact, tell me that Russia hacked the election? First question. The answer to that is always no. If you can't even answer the first question, how do you know the second question is true? Now, say for the moment that the first question you say yes, I can't do it, but I think so. Then the next question, can you look me in the eye and definitively tell me that Donald Trump worked with Russia to do this? And the answer, again, is always no. If the answer was yes, they would have ran out screaming with their hair on fire with a big banner giving the actual email, the data, or whatever else to prove that point. They can't prove that point. There's a lot of smoke. There's no fire. And I got to be honest, that initial smoke stash was done through the Hillary Clinton campaign. So, yeah. I see it on TYT interviews. Yeah, I'm going to talk like that. I'm going to check it out. Ben Shapiro talks fast, says nothing. Yeah, right. I didn't think he said anything on that. Hilarious that he's the right intellectual. Yeah, I don't quite get that either. But come on. I mean, the right intellectual, like, what they mean by right intellectual is somebody that can make a decent argument for why a few people should have more. White poverty, it should be, understood and allowed in a society that doesn't necessarily need poverty. Making the argument for the top 1% to fuck over the other percent. That's the argument. If you can find somebody who can make a decent case for that, even if it's just stylistically. Oh, this guy's now an intellectual for the case. It's like Paul Ryan being the intellectual for the Republican Party. It's fucking ridiculous. Fucking ridiculous. Clad illusion. Theresa May is a British politician serving as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and leader of the Conservative Party since 2016. The Euro version of Paul Ryan. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty much. Dave Rubin is right intellectual. It's funny. I remember Dave Rubin being on TYT. And all of a sudden, he's out parroting this other stuff. Yeah. All right. I'm not going to hold this one up. This was just done for as long as it took my food to cook. But I like Prime Minister questions, man. I just thought in this particular one, I love that he held his shape when asked that question, when pointing to one criminal like law enforcement. Democrats fold like a weak, cheap suit anytime you get on issues of defense, anytime you get on issues of law enforcement. There needs to be a leash on law enforcement. The number of people that they've murdered, the idea that they can steal people's property is fucking amazing and should not be tolerated in any society at all. We have 5% of the world's population with 15% of that population in our prisons. We have more people in our prisons than China. China has 3 times our population. I'm trying to get across this idea of what a prison state looks like. That's what I'm trying to get across. So, I will leave it at that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support me with Patreon. Thanks guys.